What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. This time it is a post-game episode for you guys. So, I saw the lineup come out today and I looked through the lineup and it's like, man, this is getting ugly. It's just a lineup of role players at this point. Like looking at it, McNeil, Bolte, Butler, Geloff, Cortez, White, Walton, Williams, Serven, and I'm like, man, maybe you can make the argument that Geloff has kind of moved himself back into the core player conversation. And I think there's a legitimate argument that Bolte's going to be there one day. But you look at this lineup and you're like, man, this is literally all role players. Like you could make a legitimate argument that our five best players are out of the lineup. And you looked at the pitching matchup, Michael Wacha, all-star this year for the Royals, and you kind of see like, man, this is going to be a little bit of a tough game, right? This is going to be a little bit of a tough game. We got probably our weakest starter on the mound in Mason Barnett. You got the Royals ace on the mound in Michael Wacha. You got a lineup full of role players. And so going into this game, I was pretty hesitant about what it would look like. And then Jeff McNeil homered on literally the first pitch of the game. And you're like, all right, well, maybe this momentum they've built up over the last couple of days will keep rolling. But that went away really, really quickly. Carlos Cortez hit into a double play to end the first inning when the A's had a little bit of a rally going. And then you get into the bottom half, and you just saw Mason Barnett just didn't have it today whatsoever. A lot of times these young pitchers, when they really have their command and really have their stuff, they'll have a good game. But when their command is lacking, they just don't really have the tools to work through a big league outing when their stuff isn't sharp. And pretty much that's what happened to Mason Barnett today. Like he struck out the first hitter of the game, and then the rest of the game really, really rough. 2 2/3 innings, 7 hits, 6 runs, 4 walks, 2 strikeouts. So really rough game. And at the end of the day, guys, like I think Mason Barnett is a relief pitcher. You look at his stuff, you look at how it profiles. His fastball cuts. He throws a breaking ball. He throws a curveball. Really, the changeup is the only thing that moves arm side. Everything else moves glove side. And when you have basically a majority of your stuff moving one way, it just becomes really hard to get hitters out multiple times through the lineup. And you combine that with Mason Barnett having really kind of below average command. And, you're going to get a good outing out of him now and then. But more often than not, I think this is what you're going to get as a starter at this point. And, looking through who the A's have, Jeffrey Springs is going to come back at some point. It sounds like within the next week. And then they'll probably move him into Barnett's spot in the rotation, would be my guess. But it's not like you look at AAA and you're like thrilled with the options down there either. The other thing I thought about for a rotation spot was Luis Medina, moving him back into the rotation. I just don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze on that because he's been your second best reliever this year. It looks like he's really getting comfortable in that role. And, he's probably going to be a bad starter too. So it's like, do you really give up your second best reliever to have him probably do the same thing Barnett does in the rotation? I don't really think you do that. So, it's probably going to be Springs. I'm hoping Barnett goes back into the bullpen. I think long-term, that's kind of his role just with the way his stuff works. I think there's some upside for him in the bullpen. But as a guy in the rotation right now, it's not really working. The A's made a little bit of a comeback. You saw the bottom of the order put some things together. Tommy White homers for the second game in a row, which was really good to see. And then you get the bottom of the order doing some things. Donnie Walton doubles. Then you get Alika Williams, really good at bat to get him over. Hits a deep fly ball to right. And then Brian Serven comes up looking to just elevate something, driving the run. And he does that and a little bit more by leaving the yard there, and it makes it 6-4. But then this is the issue with your starter only going, 2 2/3 innings. Hey, you got a great outing from Hayden Younger, right? He goes out, gets out of a bases loaded jam, gives you 2 innings on top of that, goes 2 1/3, no runs. Great outing from him, right? But with this A's bullpen, like you're just not going to get 5 or 6 scoreless innings from the bullpen. Like you're just not. Like that's going to happen once in a blue moon, but that's about it. So you get Blewett in there. He goes 2 innings, gives up 1 run. Fine. Seth Johnson comes in. I like the way he moves on the mound. Like he's super athletic. He hits 100 miles an hour. You just see him and you're like, all right, he's reminds you of like Luis Medina at times this year and Elvis Alvarado at times this year. He just doesn't really miss barrels right now. And I still like that we have him, right? I like that there's plus stuff coming from the bullpen. But at the moment, like, he's not a guy you're going to count on for outs. And the A's pretty much knew that when they got him, I would think, hoping, he comes in and does some good things. I like that he's in the organization. Give me as many 100-mile-an-hour bullpen arms as you can. But again, he got hit hard for his second outing in a row. And, that was that. They just put together a little something in the ninth, but not really anything. Definitely a day where I don't know who won the Lucas Erceg trade a few years ago, because the only guy worse than Mason Barnett in this game for either team was Lucas Erceg, who faced 3 batters, gave up a hit and 2 walks, and was pulled from the game. So, between Barnett and Lucas Erceg, they went 2 2/3 innings, gave up 8 hits, 7 runs, 6 walks, only struck out 2. So I don't know who won that trade, right? They were traded for each other. They were both horrible. But, at the end of the day, this is kind of what you're going to get from this A's team more often than not. Like, the Rangers series was a lot of fun. But having said that, that just kind of is the ebbs and flow of a season. Like, even bad teams are going to have good series from time to time. And I think that's what it was a bad A's team having a good series. And that's fun. Like, we should enjoy it as A's fans. We don't have anything else to enjoy. But that's not anything more than like the ebb and flow of a season, a bad team having a good series, right? And, you got back to this one, and it was a little bit more of a reality check. And this is kind of what we've seen more from the A's lately. Hobbs, Barnett is a disaster. Yeah, I mean, I just think his time in the rotation is about run its course. I think there's a role for him in the bullpen, but for now, it is what it is. Little Cat dumped my goat, Colby, for an end of the season DFA. Seth Johnson, great move. Colby Thomas is not doing anything either, though. I looked him up. He's like really struggling in AAA for the Phillies too. I mean, I think you traded like the offensive version of Colby Thomas for the pitching version of Colby Thomas. And I'll take the pitching version of Colby Thomas right now, because you need as many dart throws as you could possibly have in the bullpen. But again, Seth Johnson hasn't looked good, right? Like, he hasn't looked good. He's struggled. So, it kind of just, it is what it is. It's a trade for 2 guys that both teams are really throwing darts at. And you hope the pitching dart hits. The Phillies hope the offensive dart hits. We'll see. I mean, I think it's too soon to judge if it's a good move or a bad move, because both of them have struggled since getting traded. Hobbs, aside from Harris and Basso, who is worth keeping? So I like that you brought up Basso there. One thing about Brady Basso, people forget he was pretty good 2 years ago for the A's as a starter. And 2 spring trainings ago, he was really, really good. And it kind of looked like he was about to win the 5th spot in the rotation. And then he got hurt. He had, I think it was a shoulder strain, something like that, but it kept him out a long time. And what you saw last year is he's always been a guy that's thrown a ton of strikes, like doesn't walk anybody. And he came back last year and wasn't very good from a strikeout to walk standpoint. He was walking guys in the minor leagues. He got his cup of coffee in the big leagues. He actually had a good ERA, but he had more walks than strikeouts and wasn't really throwing strikes. And at the beginning of this year, that's kind of what you saw too, is like the command didn't really come back. But in the last few months in AAA, he stopped walking guys. He started filling up the zone. And that's what you've seen in the big leagues. I think he's only walked like 3 guys since he's been back. And, he's probably been their either second or third best reliever. When you factor in Medina, Harris probably being the best guy. But I like what Basso's done. Like, I think he, like you said, second spot in the bullpen for a lefty. I think he could definitely do something there next year, as long as he keeps throwing strikes the way he has. Harris, he's been good. I think Medina is worth keeping around in the bullpen because, he has a 3.6 ERA. He's quietly had a good year. He's really struggled in bigger spots late in games, but he's had some success in some of the tight games earlier on in the game. I think there's a bullpen role for Medina next year. Alvarado has been so up and down, but I think with the stuff, and you look at his peripherals, they basically match what he did last year in terms of like strikeout to walk and hits allowed and stuff like that. So I think Alvarado's probably in the bullpen next year. I actually like Drew Rom, the lefty who they got from the Brewers. It's a small sample size, but his numbers are really good this year between the A's and the Brewers. And when he was DFA'd on baseball MLB trade rumors, they were basically saying when the A's picked him up, they were actually surprised two teams passed on him in the waiver process. They were surprised the Rockies and the Angels both passed on him in the waiver process. So Drew Rom, I think, is a name just to keep an eye on. I don't think he's guaranteed a bullpen spot, anything like that next year. But he's a former fairly highly rated prospect. I'm pulling up his numbers right now. He has 14 strikeouts in 7 2/3 innings in the big leagues. And again, that's a really small sample size. But I think there could be a chance he sticks in the bullpen next year. We'll see. It's kind of, we'll just see. I'm cautiously optimistic about him more than these other guys that Hayden Yoger and Scott Blewett and guys like that. So we will see what happens with the bullpen next year. Realistically, Harris has been the A's guy. Harris should be the third or fourth best reliever in a bullpen, and that's just not the case right now. So yeah, you're pretty much working with Harris. I like what Basso's done. I'm not 100% sold on him, but I like the fact he's throwing strikes again. Then you have Medina, who's flashed some good things. You have Alvarado, who's really had an up and down year, but has a lot of upside. And then you have a bunch of dart throws at the other end. My favorite of those dart throws is probably Drew Rom, but I'm not saying, hey, bank on this guy being in the bullpen next year. I also think guys like Barnett, who have struggled in the rotation, could be decent in the bullpen. So there's some options for the bullpen next year, but it's there's definitely a lot of work to do to make the bullpen competitive. And part of what is going to help the bullpen is going to be helping the rotation, as in getting more innings in the rotation. Because right now you see this bullpen, like they've just been overexposed. They're not that good. So they're just getting lit up at this point most of the time. Although they have been a little bit better lately. Bob, great show tonight. I think Basso has the same problem Mike Trout and Tim Salmon had as players. He is a really fishy character. All right. Sometimes we need those puns to lighten the mood after a loss. So appreciate it, Bob. Looking at this game, you have the Royals and they have their superstar, Bobby Witt. He dominated. He hit a home run. He hit a double. He had another double late that it felt like Carlos Cortez could have caught, but, he's not really going to get to anything out there. He had a better game than, he had one of those games that star players are going to have. The A's offense did do some things like, you're facing an all-star, granted, kind of a soft all-star resume, but at the same time, like Michael Wacha is an all-star. He's a good pitcher. He's a good pitcher at home. It's a tough ballpark to hit in. You're basically running out a lineup of role players and backups and, the aviators at this point. And they did some things, obviously. Good to see Tommy White hit his second home run. He obviously has power, and we all know that because of his college career. He's kind of been this guy throughout professional baseball where he's more hit over power. I don't think he's going to be a zero power guy like he was up until this point. So it is good to see him start leaving the yard. Do I ever think he's going to be, a big time slugger in the big leagues? I don't think so. But it's good to see him start to find that power stroke a little bit, start to find that confidence a little bit because the power's there. He reminds me a lot of Miguel Andujar. I think career-wise, I think that's a pretty realistic expectation for him. As in, they're both these like guys that you expect to hit for power, and they can hit the ball really hard, but really they're going to make a lot of contact and kind of spray the ball all over the field and be these really handsy hitters that don't elevate the ball as much as you would think they would for their profile. But, put together like a really solid big league career. Like Miguel Andujar is a solid hitter, right? The A's had him last year, and Miguel Andujar was really good for the A's, right? He was really good. He was a solid player, didn't really add anything from the defensive standpoint, but, solid bat. You want him on your team, all of that. I think that's what Tommy White is that is the most likely outcome for Tommy White, right? I don't want to say he can't turn into like this middle of the order bat, but I think the most likely outcome is kind of a McGill Andujar type career, which, is valuable. It's good. It's probably not what some people are expecting based on his college career, but based on what I've seen from him, he reminds me a lot as a hitter of McGill Andujar and just a younger version of that. So I think that's kind of a realistic expectation for him to turn into. Hobbs, 12 joules or 10 joules. I have no idea what that means. Maybe I'm getting old, but I have just absolutely no idea what the whole joule thing is. So yeah, Tommy White, it was good to see him leave the yard. It was good to see Jeff McNeil continue his tear. He's been good. He's had such a roller coaster of a season because he started out in the first 10 games. He was horrible. And then he got really, really hot for a while, was hitting up over 300. And then he went into the tank for like 2 months, and his average was way down at like 229. And then he's gotten really hot since then. So it's funny because you look at his numbers now, 259. He's hit 6 home runs, 670 OPS, and you're like, man, he's probably going to finish about where we expected him to. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he finishes hitting like, 270 with 9 home runs or something like that. And, he's going to play first base more or less every day the rest of the way, first or second, more or less every day, with Kurtz out the rest of the year and stuff like that. And that brings me to something else I want to touch on too, which was Jacob Wilson was scratched from the lineup today. And I think all A's fans have kind of been saying this, but like, there's really no reason for Jacob Wilson to be running out there every single day and playing games when the A's have no chance at making the playoffs. He obviously has a banged up shoulder. Those dislocated shoulders, I mean, you typically need surgery on at some point. I remember Brandon Inge had that, and Brandon Inge, that ended one of his seasons with the A's because he had to have shoulder surgery. And so it's just like, shut him down. Like, obviously, I don't know exactly what's going on with his shoulder. I'm not inside the doors talking to him about what's going on. But it really just seems like, man, he's not really playing that well right now. He's obviously banged up. He was scratched from this start. There's not really a reason to have him play. Like, he just needs to be shut down, right? Take it a little bit easy, be shut down, in my opinion, and pack it up and see what happens next year. And it's a bummer because, this A season, when they were healthy, they were around a 500 team, right? They had their warts, they had their problems. They were walking a tightrope. The rotation was kind of duct taped together. The bullpen was still really bad at that time, but they were able to keep it around 500. And then you started to see these injuries happen and pile up, and it's just a team that couldn't withstand that. Not saying they would have had a great season without the injuries because, it was trending towards 500, a little bit below 500 before the injuries. But, this team is just, you look at them now and you're like, man, how do you – this reminds me of 2023, like where you look at the lineup and you're like, man, okay, I guess I can get excited about Bolte. I guess I can be excited about Geloff. We can see what Tommy White has for us. But realistically, you look at this lineup and you're like, hey, more often than not, they're going to score 4 runs or less based on this lineup they're running out there. Hopefully, when they have a big game offensively, the pitching does their end, but that's also a question mark too. So it's just one of those things right now where you look at the season and where it's at, and you look at the lineup and where it's at, and it's just like, man, this is rough. So point is, I don't think Jacob Wilson needs to be playing. I don't really think there's any reason for it. I think there is, if you're Jacob Wilson, if you're one of these guys, if you're Tyler Soderstrom even, it's like, hey, let's get healthy. Let's try to make a run next year. This year's off the table at this point anyway. And, there's not much of a point in us playing games, right? And I think the A's front office has to make that decision for them and let them kind of rest up the rest of the way. And speaking of the front office too, this gets me to some of the other news that has been hitting the last few days, and I haven't really had a chance to touch on it too much, but you hear the Ken Rosenthal article basically saying how the A's need to be rebuilt. And it's basically saying the A's are dead last in terms of how many people they employ in their analytics department, right? Now, the A's have been trending that way for a long time, even since like the money. So Moneyball was obsolete by 5 years after by the time we were reading the book, Moneyball as a philosophy of like getting a competitive edge on people was outdated, right? And, these things move really, really fast. A lot of people view the A's as like an analytically minded team because of the movie Moneyball and because of the book Moneyball, but really they haven't been that in years. Even, their runs in 2012 and, in 2019 and whatnot, when they made those runs, they weren't super analytically driven, right? But to hear they're dead last in the resources they spend on analytics, I think is a major problem for this organization. And you can have whatever opinion you want on analytics, right? Like you can have whatever opinion you want on analytics, but at the end of the day, it is a resource the front office uses to make decisions, right? And you want as much information as you can possibly have in order to make informed decisions. Because if you don't have as much information as the other teams, what you're doing is you're basically putting it on the eye test and on scouts to outsmart all of these other organizations with less resources and less information, which is going to be really tough to do because the A's are not going to outspend some of these teams, right? So you're asking them to basically outsmart these other organizations. And these other organizations aren't just random people walking around into the Dodgers clubhouse, right? Or into the Dodgers front office, right? These are the top 1% of people at what they do working for major league organizations. So you're basically asking the A's to outsmart the best baseball people in the world with less information than those people have, right? And you're not able to spend as much money as them either. So you just look at that and it's really frustrating because at the end of the day, you need to provide your front office with resources, right? And this goes up to ownership. And I don't touch on the ownership stuff all that much because I'm a baseball guy. That's a little bit above like what I usually like to talk about. But at the end of the day, like the A's need to be spending money. Like the Rays don't spend money on free agents, but what they spend money on is the staffing behind the scenes that's going to provide resources for their front office, right? They talked about in that Ken Rosenthal article, the Rays have 33 members of their analytics team in the front office and the A's have 6. So, that just is going to provide you that much more resources. That's going to provide you that much more information. And when you're a team that doesn't spend money, when you're the Brewers, the Guardians, the Rays, any of these small market teams, you have to be on the cutting edge of other things. You have to find a way to get advantages against other teams. And it's really tough to find those advantages when you have less resources to seek out those advantages. And so you look at that and we're going to kind of get pessimistic here, but you're like, how were the A's ever expected to compete in these years, right? And I don't think I really want the answer to that question, if I'm being honest. But you look at the front office and you look at David Forrest, and there was obviously things he could have done better. But you look at it and you're like, it's a huge ask for this front office to be able to identify talent that other organizations haven't been able to identify and put a team out there on the field that can compete with these bigger markets in a situation where they just don't have the resources to identify those players, right? Because you can be as good as you want old school scouting wise, right? But those other organizations are going to have really good old school scouts too. Like that's not something they're lacking, right? That's not something they're lacking. And when you combine it with the other resources analytically, with the information, with the data, again, like I said, like you want as much information as possible in order to make informed decisions. And when you don't have that information, you're not going to spend money on free agents. You're playing in a park that players don't want to go to. The odds of putting together a team on the field that is going to consistently win games is incredibly low. And, credit to the A's for drafting a superstar in Nick Kurtz, and credit to the A's for drafting a couple other really good players. Tyler Soderstrom. I think Tyler Soderstrom's year is a little bit underrated. He's having a great year, honestly. His average is lower, but his OPS is about the same. He's second in the league in doubles. We were all going ape shit when JJ Bleday did that 2 years ago. He's having a better year than JJ Bleday had 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, or whatever it was. And so I think his year is a little underrated. So point is, credit to the A's for drafting those guys, right? There's probably a little bit of luck involved in getting players as good as like Kurtz in the draft. But, you're going to have a new front office coming in. At least you would hope so, right? You would hope the A's overhaul their front office a little bit. The Colorado Rockies did this last year. The Rockies were known as one of the more stubborn organizations in terms of like their front office, and they overhauled it this last offseason. And, you don't see immediate success, but you do see a better team on the field for the Rockies than you've seen in the past, right? And I want to see the A's do that. But point is, it's not going to matter the GM you bring in, because if you don't invest in the resources necessary to help that GM be able to identify players, and you don't invest in the staffing behind the scenes, like it's just not going to matter. You're just going to run the same situation with a different face if the GM doesn't get more resources. And, you hope that basically what this firing of force signals is the A's were going to spend more money in Las Vegas, right? That's the hope for everybody. And I think there is very good reason to believe they're going to do that, because you're going to want to attract fans in a new market. You're going to want to create that foundation for a fan base moving forward. And so there is reason to believe the A's are going to spend on more when they get to Vegas. Hopefully this means some of at least the behind the scenes spending is going to happen a little bit sooner, because, the A's can spend on free agents all they want. You're going to misidentify free agents, and you are going to miss on more free agents, more trades, all of that, when you have less resources and less data and less information on the players you're trying to sign or trying to trade for than other organizations have, right? So you're going to need more investment behind the scenes no matter what. Like, you could hire Billy Beane 2.0, and it's probably not going to matter if there's not going to be the resources behind the scenes to identify those market inefficiencies, to identify those things that are going to give the A's a competitive advantage. And the thing is too, like, if you're not paying for staffers behind the scenes, if you have really good people, they're going to leave. Like, that's the other thing too. Like, Billy Beane staying as on with the A's for as long as he is, that is an exception. That is not the rule, right? So I forget his name, but the A's minor league pitching coordinator last year was doing, I think, a pretty good job, because you saw pretty big steps forward from some of the A's minor league pitchers. And that might be oversimplifying it, saying like, hey, this guy who's overseeing it was good, so therefore these pitchers improved. That's probably oversimplifying it on my end. But point is, I think he obviously did a good job. I don't think there's really a way to say he didn't do a good job. And in the offseason, the Royals paid him more money, so he's with the Royals now. And then the A's hired Barry Enright this last year to be before this season to be their minor league pitching coordinator. And I don't know if Barry Enright was any good or not, and I'll never really know, because he was hired away by Texas A&M, right? Like, you have college programs spending more money mid-year to get a guy to leave his job in the A's organization than the A's are willing to pay. And it's just like, so even if you have good people, even if you have those people, you hire those people that can outsmart everyone else in Major League Baseball, they're going to be gone in a year anyway. So point is, the investment does have to happen in the front office. And that is going to be the first thing that's going to start turning the A's organization around. But it needs to be significant, right? Like, your staff can't go from 6 people in the analytics department to 8 people in the analytics department, right? It's got to go from 6 people to 25 people. It's got to go, and that's not just the analytics department, that's, everybody in the front office. There have to be the resources available. You have to be able to invest in that technology enough to get this team back on the right track. So, kind of a little rant there, but I did want to touch on that. I think more than just analytics, because this isn't an analytics rant. I find myself actually, people think I'm more of an analytics guy. I find myself talking more eye test stuff than anything. Like I use stats, but really I use stats to fact check my eyes. And, I don't think analytics are necessarily the be all end all, but I do think they are a legitimate resource. All good teams invest in analytics. All small market teams that win games have a heavily analytically focused. And so if you're going to be a good small market team, like you have to do the same. And the A's aren't doing that. And it's basically as simple as that. Okay, you don't know what the jewels thing are either. Yeah, sure. You hit a button. I'm old. Shoot, man, I think I'm getting old now. I feel old at least. So that's going to wrap it up, guys. I mean, really, there's not a lot to talk about with this game. Another loss, another game where the A's give up 9 runs, another game where the starter gets hit and the bullpen gives you a few good innings, but after that, they cave too. At least the A's had a little bit of offense in this one. That was something. They hit 3 home runs. Bolte looks good. That's been exciting. Tommy White hit another home run. That's definitely a trend you want to see continue. Tomorrow, the A's have Jack Perkins on the mound. I've been a huge Jack Perkins supporter. He has really struggled more and more as the season's gone on. He got really unlucky early in the year, and then he just hasn't pitched that well his last handful of starts. And, hopefully he can kind of get back on track. There's the stuff to get righties and lefties out. He's got to figure out what to do with his fastball. The A's have to figure that out. And that's something that an analytics department could probably help out a bunch with. And then the next 2 games of the series, we got TBD for the A's. Tomorrow, Kansas City is also throwing to be determined. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, guys, not much to touch on in this game. Another A's loss. Didn't really do anything particularly well. Pitching struggled. Same basic story for probably 90 games this year, and we'll call it there. So this has been another episode of Where Stats Meet Instinct. Guys, like and subscribe to the channel. That helps us a ton. I know the A's are struggling right now, but man, the guys on this network bring a lot of passion, bring a lot of enthusiasm, and we're going to be breaking it all down. We're going to be giving quality information the entire time. So give a like, give a subscribe. All of that helps us out a ton. And with that, guys, we will end it there. As always, go A's.